All right, so today we're going to go deep on something pretty fascinating, right? I mean, we're talking about Frank Wang, the guy behind DJI, and how he basically built like this global drone empire, and yet like nobody really knows who he is.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, isn't it? Like, here's a guy who's reshaped a whole industry, brought Chinese tech to the world stage in a huge way, but he's just under the radar.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're going to try to unpack today. So basically, we're going to break this whole deep dive right into three main parts. So first, we're going to start with, Wang's early days.
Mm.
Like where he came from, what kind of struggles did he have to overcome? And then we'll jump into the whole Colin Gwynn thing, which is, oh man, that's a story in itself and how the
Yeah.
whole thing blew up. And then finally, we'll look at how DJI just took over, like totally dominated after Wang, kind of took all the reins.
Yeah, and I think, what makes this so interesting is like, you've got this crazy ambition, you've got some serious conflict, and then ultimately you've got this huge success story. And, the EAO audio series, that's going to be our main source here, really brings all of this to life.
So let's rewind all the way back to the beginning, right? Frank Wang, the early days. What strikes me is that this guy, he's like this crazy mix of personality traits. You hear about him being super private, almost like a recluse, but then at the same time, he's got this massive ego.
Yeah, that's like a key thing about him, isn't it? Like, there's this famous quote where he basically says he only admires two people, Ren Zhengfei, the Huawei guy, and wait for it, himself. Like, that says a lot about him, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, talk about self-belief, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't stop there, right? Like his view of Steve Jobs was, well, let's just say less than flattering. He called him, and I'm paraphrasing here, half admirable, half garbage. I mean, that gives you a sense of how, this guy judges the world, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And the way he, like, categorized people, right? Good, bad, smart, stupid. And his definition of smart was all about getting to the core of things. Like, you can see that in how he built DJI.
Now, this whole drive, right, this ambition, it sounds like it started pretty early with his obsession with model airplanes.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it wasn't exactly a smooth takeoff, was it?
No, not at all. Like, picture this. Teenage Wang gets his first remote-controlled helicopter, right? Total excitement. And what happens? It crashes, like, immediately. And then, to make matters worse, the repairs. They take months to come from Hong Kong. So yeah, not a great first impression of the tech.
Oh, man, that's rough. So basically, this huge disappointment, that's what actually sparked his ambition. Like, all right, I'm going to build my own aircraft, and it's going to be way better.
Exactly. It's like that setback. It was like this unexpected launch pad for his whole future. Now, of course, his parents, they weren't exactly thrilled about this whole aviation thing, were they? Especially with the whole Gaokao thing looming, the national college entrance exams.
Oh, yeah, huge pressure, right.
Yeah.
So how did they react to his, his passion?
Well, there's this awesome story where during some conversation about, college and all that, Wang just straight up says, I'm not going to be some bookworm. My life's going to be different. Like, talk about knowing what you want, right?
Wow. Bold move, right? So, I mean, his parents, did they ever come around?
Yeah, eventually. I mean, they
Yeah.
still emphasize the importance of, academics and doing well in the Gaokao, but, they start supporting his interests too. Like, they provided a structure, but they let his passion grow.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Supportive but realistic, right?
Ah.
All right, so let's move on to his time at HKUS, the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. You'd think, okay, he's studying electronic and computer engineering. He's going to be all focused on that, right?
Well, not exactly. I mean, he was still obsessed with model aircraft. Like, that was still his main thing. He did compete in robotics competitions, even won some championships. But man, there were a lot of crashes along the way, even some injuries. Sounds like he was really learning by doing, even if it meant getting banged up a bit.
Learning the hard way.
Right.
Okay, so then there's this whole graduation project thing. And again, it doesn't seem like he played it exactly by the book, did he?
No, he definitely didn't. So he comes up with this idea for a flight control system for remote-controlled helicopters. Something with auto-hovering capabilities. Sounds pretty cool, right? But his professor, not so impressed.
What, the professor wasn't into it? Why not?
Well, the professor basically thought it wasn't relevant enough to the actual coursework, But Wang, he wasn't giving up. He manages to convince two of his classmates to join him, and together, they finally get the professor on board.
So even back then, he had this ability to, like, persuade people, get them to buy into his vision. Pretty impressive.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And then they actually managed to get some funding from the university, like 18,000 Hong Kong dollars. Not a ton, but it was a start. And the stories about his work ethic during this time are crazy. Like, he was pulling all-nighters, often working till 5 a.m.
Wow, dedicated, much.
Yeah.
But wait a minute, didn't you say something about a major setback right before graduation?
Yeah, there's this like almost tragic moment, right? The night before his graduation offense, his whole flight control system just fails, like complete disaster. So he ends up with a C grade and graduates, but it was a tough one, you know?
Oh man, that's got to be crushing after all that work. But so this is where this really important figure comes in, right?
Mhm.
Professor Li Zexiang, his mentor at HKUST. Tell us a bit about this guy.
Okay, so Professor Lay, he was this seriously accomplished academic. I mean, we're talking degrees from Carnegie Mellon, UC Berkeley, MIT, the whole shebang. He wasn't exactly known for being like the most popular teacher, maybe a little bit old school, but he definitely saw something special in Wang.
So despite maybe not being the coolest professor, he had a huge impact on Wang's journey, right? How so?
Well, the biggest thing was that he believed in Wang's vision. And get this, he actually gave him a space to start his company. It was this tiny warehouse in Shenzhen, like less than 20 square meters, in this area called Shigangmiao. And that became the first home of DJI innovation. Like, that was a huge deal for Wang, having an actual physical place to start building his dream.
That's pretty amazing, a professor giving a recent grad that kind of support. But money must have been super tight, right?
Oh, yeah, extremely tight. I mean, they were basically scraping by on whatever prize money Wang had won from competitions and a little bit of money from Professor Lai. Like, rumor has it was around 200,000 RMB. Not much to start a global empire, right?
No kidding. But even with basically nothing, Wang was already thinking big, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah, he had this crazy quote. Even if we only sell a few dozen products a month, we'll be the best in the world. I mean, can you imagine the confidence? No connections, no experience, no real product, no money, but he was already aiming for the top.
Talk about aiming high. So, I mean, things must have been super rough in those early days. Did his initial team even stick around?
Well, no, not really. I mean, the reality of startup life hit hard, right? Long hours, no guarantees, lots of uncertainty. So yeah, his co-founders bailed, and apparently they later regretted it big time seeing how successful DJI became. But the thing is, the audio series also suggests that Wang wasn't the easiest guy to work with, you know? Like, he wasn't great at planning, had some mood swings, could be really demanding, and not always the best with partners. So maybe not a huge surprise that they left.
So it sounds like a classic startup story, right? Big dreams, lots of struggles, and a founder who maybe wasn't the easiest guy to work for. Now let's fast forward a bit, right? The drone industry is starting to take off, and this is where Colin Gwynn enters the picture.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting. So after those tough early years, Wang's focus on building the best tech, it starts to pay off. They make a major breakthrough in flight control systems, and this is what really sets them up for success. I mean, this wasn't just like a small improvement. This was like a game changer.
And I remember reading about this demo, right? Zhu Feng flying a DJI drone on a snowy mountain. That seems like it was a big moment for the company.
Oh yeah, huge moment. I mean, this demo showed everyone that DJI's tech was the real deal. You know, it could handle tough conditions, it was reliable, and that got a lot of people's attention.
Yeah, it's like they went from being this promising startup to a serious player, right?
Right.
So this growing reputation, that's probably what led them to expand into North America and bring in Colin Gwynn. Now, for people who don't know, who was this guy?
Okay, so Colin Gwynn, he was a Hollywood cinematographer, so totally different background from Wang and the engineers at DJI, but he understood the creative side of things, the commercial potential of drones, and he was brought in to be the CEO of DJI America. It seemed like the perfect match, you know, Wang, the tech genius, and Gwynn, the guy who knew how to sell it to the world.
Yeah, on paper, it sounds like a dream team, right?
Yeah.
So what went wrong? Why did this partnership fall apart?
Well, they were just totally different people with totally different styles. Like Wang, he was super strict, detail-oriented, almost like a military commander. There's this story about signs on the office doors that said things like, bring brains, not emotions. And he had this system where if you weren't performing, you were out, like immediately. Plus, he was always working, late-night calls, the whole deal.
Wow, intense much. So basically, a total clash of cultures with someone coming from the Hollywood scene.
Exactly. Gin was probably used to a much more, you know, laid-back creative environment. So this difference in management styles created this, like, underlying tension.
And it wasn't just style, right?
Yeah.
There were some specific business decisions that caused major conflict, like that whole GoPro situation, right?
Oh, yeah, that was a big one. So Gwynn, he goes ahead and negotiates this revenue-sharing deal with GoPro, right? But he does it all on his own, without getting approval from headquarters in Shenzhen. And Wang, he was furious. It was like this Chinese saying, when a general is operating far from the capital, some orders from the ruler may not be strictly followed. But Wang wasn't having any of that.
Wow, so Wang basically said, nope, not happening, and that caused even more tension with Qin, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And that's when Wang really started to tighten his grip on the company. He basically merged the North American branch back into the main structure, so Gwyn had less power. It was a clear power move.
Okay, so the power struggle heats up, and then things get even worse with the whole equity dispute. Sounds like that was the final nail in the coffin.
Yeah, so they start negotiating how much of the company Gwyn should own, right? And Gwyn, he's thinking, hey, I've built up the North American market. I deserve a big chunk. So he asks for 16%.
Wow, that's a big chunk. What did Wang think about that?
Wang, he offered him 0.3%. Like, that's a huge difference. The audio series uses this analogy of trying to negotiate the price of, like, a rare antique coin. One guy's offering a fortune, the other's offering pennies. It just shows how far apart they were.
Yeah, no kidding. So, unsurprisingly, this blows up into a full-on legal battle in the U.S. I mean, what did that do to DJI's business?
Oh, it was a mess. Assets got frozen, bad press everywhere, lots of uncertainty. It was a really tough time for the company, especially in such an important market.
But get this, Wang, who usually avoids the media like the plague, actually started talking to the press about the lawsuits. That's how serious it was, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. It shows how much this whole thing mattered to him. And in the end, they settled out of court. Gin walked away with 10 million bucks, which isn't bad, but it's definitely way less than he wanted.
Yeah, and the story doesn't end there, right? Again, he didn't just disappear.
Nope. He joined 3D Robotics, which was basically trying to take on DJI. And, there were rumors that he was, well, let's just say, motivated by a little bit of revenge.
So the rivalry continues.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the final chapter here. DJI, they overcame all this drama and became even more successful. Like, they just crushed it. How did that happen?
Okay, so a couple of things. First, Wang never stopped focusing on the tech, on being the best. While other companies were trying to compete on price or whatever, DJI was just pushing the limits of what drones could do. And that gave them a huge advantage.
And wasn't there a story about Xiaomi trying to get into the drone game around this time?
Yeah, so apparently Xiaomi's founder, Li Zexiang, he had this idea to make like these cheap mass market drones, kind of like what they did with phones. And they even had this meeting with Wang where he basically offered to sell them DJI's flight control systems. But Li Zexiang, he wanted to go his own way, make their own tech.
And that didn't really work out for them, did it?
Not at all. It turns out that building great drones, it takes a lot more than just slapping your brand on a cheap product. You need serious R&D, and DJI, they were way ahead of the game. So Xiaomi, they learned the hard way that you can't just copy-paste your success from one industry to another.
Yeah, sometimes you got to stick to what you know, right?
Yeah.
Now, besides just out-innovating everyone, Wang also went after his competitors pretty aggressively, didn't he? I remember reading about Lingdu Intelligence, or 00 Robotics, and how they basically got crushed by DJI.
Oh, yeah. Wang was ruthless. I mean, he took on Lingdu. He even took on his own products. Like when the mini-series started outselling the Phantom 4, he was all about using superior tech and aggressive pricing to dominate the market. And there's this crazy story about Lingdu's CEO, Yang Jianjun, basically admitting defeat to Wang after years of battling it out. They even met up later, and DJI ended up helping Lingdu sell off their remaining inventory and even collaborate on some tech. Talk about adding insult to injury, right?
Wow, it's like the king showing mercy to the defeated. And by 2016, the drone market was basically a DJI monopoly, right?
Pretty much. Zero Robotics, Ehang, 3D Robotics, they all struggled. Some even went bankrupt. DJI was just too powerful.
And all this success, it made Frank Wang a global name, a billionaire, many times over.
Yeah.
I think he was even ranked higher than Mark Zuckerberg on some list of influential entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah. His net worth went from like 3.6 billion in 2015 to 24 billion in 2016 and then 45 billion in 2018. It's insane. And then there was that billion-dollar funding round in 2018 where they basically held a silent auction for investors. Like people were begging to give them money.
That's crazy. So you've got this super private guy who built this massive global company and became insanely rich, but still stayed out of the spotlight. It's a pretty unique story.
It really is. And it makes you think, right? Like how much of his success was because of his personality, his drive, his ruthlessness? And what does it mean that one company has so much power in such an important industry? I mean, drones are everywhere now, and DJI is basically calling the shots.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about. So for everyone listening, we want to leave you with this. Think about the balance between ambition, personality, and the reality of building a global giant. and consider what it means for one company to have so much control over a technology that's changing the world.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been a wild ride.
Until next time.